Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it was the beginning of COVID for me. I was sitting in this studio room here that I'm in right now that I built and went down the rabbit hole of kind of starting to understand conversion and where that mattered. You can have studio monitors in a tiny room like this, and none of it will help you mix. But when it came to the quality of sound and kind of getting to the bottom of where things really start, I realized conversion is the point in which most of us weren't really paying too much attention to. We had been running a lot of really great, products, high connectivity stuff, UAD stuff, and I stumbled across this. I can't really remember. I believe it was online, and it was just the most interesting looking thing when I saw the first thing I was looking for a monitor controller. Let's be honest, and there were so many different options and weird ways to go, but I was researching like highest end mastering grade, and I ended up on the Hilo, and so I bought a Lynx Hilo, and that was just a whole other level. It was just crazy, honestly. And just for monitoring straight out of the computer, two channels, I was just blown away at the clarity and what started to make sense in the monitors that I had in here. So that got me looking at the lineup, and then I started going further down and realizing that my UAD and the Apollo X's we use at the Beehive, which is what the place Vinnie owns, all of it was great, but there was this Lynx Aurora and this new product out, and I have a lot in the studio, not a lot, but keyboards and things that are all connected here. And I thought, what better way to really get it in the box than to test one of these out? So I bought one of those as well, which we eventually converted to Dante. That's a whole other story. But the thing that blew my mind was the minute I got it all hooked up, playing the synthesizers, there was at least a foot and a half, 2 feet on each side of my studio monitors that I'd never heard before. Just this stereo width that was absolutely incredible. Sonically, I had been listening through the Hilo, so I didn't notice anything there other than, I gotta say, I think I really, really like the headphone outputs of the Aurora N the best out of everything. Though they're insane. So, and that's really how it started. Kind of checking it all out in here. And I brought the stuff to Vinnie, and Vinnie's like the number one go-to when it comes to, if it's new, if it's awesome, I don't care if it's tested, tried and true. Let's get it in there. Let's get it ahead of everyone else. Let's make it awesome. He just doesn't have the word no built into his vocabulary.
It was even noticeable on the first time that we just used the Hilo and we were going SPDIF out, I believe, is what we were doing to try to use the Hilo for conversion for the vocal while still using UAD for the auto tune in real time. And it was noticeable. I mean, it was noticeable to the artists because we also ran the dry vocal for them in their ears, and they were able to even kind of notice the difference right out of the gate. I got introduced to the line of equipment because someone posted on their Instagram a picture of their studio. Is a producer named Benny Blanco, who's a pretty well-known producer. He has Lynx Aurora in his studio, and I was like, what is this rack? I've never seen this little rack on this LED screen before. So I Googled it, and then I was like, oh, it's expensive, whatever. Because I kind of run on a line every single day of efficiency, practicality, and then quality. And I'm going like this every single day with every single client because they all have different circumstances, and one product's not going to make sense. But like Jeff said, with our core clients who give us their trust, they let us push the envelope. And one in particular, Halsey, who we worked with heavily last year on her entire album cycle, is always letting us push the envelope because she's always trying to push the envelope. And Jeff is the guy who, when I say, I want to do something crazy like this, he's like, let's figure it out. Or if he's like, hey, I want to try this new piece of gear, I'm like, is it going to sound better? And he goes, maybe. And I go, okay, that's good enough for me. So we have like a really kind of yin yang relationship where like I'm coming from a creative side and functionality of creative, while also needing to make sure that no one gets fired for trying something new that could, make a mistake or whatever. and thinking about all those things. It's been a huge, for lack of a less cheesy overused word, game changer for us, because the interface has so many capabilities. I mean, even just being able to roll into this award show we did recently, we had the ability to do Dante in and out for all the vocal stuff, but the show didn't want to take on that stress, so we just used the D sub outs and ran it analog out. And for us, that's better than using something else. And so that was really cool.
Well, we use it. I mean, that's the great thing about, one of the funny things about me and Vinny is we will take something brand new, software, hardware, and we will run it to the max within 10 minutes of operating it. And for the live stuff, vocal production, for instance, we'll use Live Professor. We'll run a lot of plugins in Live Professor, and then we'll use Dante, and we'll send them out so we have branches to be able to adjust fairly easily. We also use it for Ableton for redundant playback scenarios like that. In a studio in here or at the Beehive, when they record lots of artists there, they'll be using Pro Tools, they'll be using Logic, they'll be using Mainstage, they'll be using Ableton. So we've used all of them with it. And with the live stream that we just did, which I believe was for a video game award with Halsey, we quickly found our limits in the software of the Aurora N alone. We were going like crazy on that, and Vinny might be able to speak on this a little bit better, but we bounced Dante in from receivers, from mics, wireless mics, into Live Professor, back in, out into a chain, which ended up being Shelford's, Neve stuff, Shelford's MBCs, and back in using the AES card on the Aurora N. So many different ways we're routing audio. It was unbelievable.
Well, I guess talking about just the listening experience, like Jeff was saying with the headphone out, I programmed everything for that award show he was talking about off of the headphone. And I gotta say, when I had to go listen off of something else, I was bummed. So like, I programmed the whole thing. I was hearing all this fidelity and the reverbs and the EQs, and when I went over, I ended up having to boost things more because I wasn't hearing it the same way. Like the reverb wasn't as wide, and the delay didn't have the sizzle, and the distortion I was using, it felt like it was breaking up. Like there was all these differences, and I was like, well, I can't tell if I'm stoked that I did all that on the headphone amp because it was more enjoyable, or if I'm like, oh, now I got to do it all over again. But it sounded great. It was just RF because I was on a wireless pack.
Well, I think the best way to put it is just the level of what it is, the quality of what it is. It has a lot of options. I forgot what it can go up to 32 outs, I believe, in a single rack. So that's huge. I mean, there are a lot of other companies out there that are starting to do that in a single U rack, but the quality, again, is bar none. And so obviously the artists, their budget really determines the show. So there's a lot of artists out there that could have 16 strings and 7 backup vocals and do all that live and not break the budget. But I think the main part of playback and becoming integral in the way it is now is that essentially the smaller artists can do the same thing. They can keep up, and the bigger artists don't need to, which is really, really nice. But vocal production wise, it's a game changer. And allows, a lot of people don't realize in the avenue of live music that the vocals are really right there on your phone. That's it. It's the first thing that shows up on the mix on a tiny little cell phone, whether you're right by the front of the stage or all the way back. And so people don't really understand exactly what goes into vocal production, how important it is for the artists to not have a bad show out there in YouTube land. They're killing it live. They're incredible live. They're amazing. The fans are having an experience they're never going to forget. But out there in YouTube land, it's our job to make sure that they stay that way, and that's one of the big keys between conversion on a unit like this and kind of our methodology behind it.
It's definitely a option that gets weighed. Like I said, I wouldn't be implementing a product like this on the bottom, excuse me, on the bottom level clients. There's a reason for certain products, and I kind of view things in tiers, right? Or in terms of how simple or complex are we going to be able to get on this gig based off of other things like staff, crew size, travel, things like that. Like the vocal chain that Jeffrey referenced on the gig we did recently, we're not going to take that on a flight to Europe and go and use it on a festival run where it's going to be raining the whole time. We're not going to do that. But we're definitely going to use it every single time. There's the aspect of what we're doing is going to be on YouTube or television, like he said. The big thing that Jeff and I have focused on really is like, while we care about the listening experience for the people on YouTube and the listening experience for the fans at the shows, and we've been heavily obsessed with conversion and quality and, you know, good preamps and good all that stuff, we also are probably the only people that really put a lot of effort and care into making sure that the artist is also hearing all of these dollar signs in their ears, because we're talking about a lot of money being spent on something for a gigantic line array. Well, guess what? The artist is listening to it on tiny speakers in their ears. Fidelity is way more transparent and obvious in that listening environment. So we're really big on our clients, the ones who are up for it, also having the luxury of hearing all of this quality as well for themselves, because if they're not performing well, then it doesn't really matter if we put $30,000 on the vocal at front of house. It's irrelevant. Cool, good sounding bad performance is still a bad performance. I think a lot of the more audiophile folks that work on the touring side are. I know a lot of playback engineers and musical directors that are becoming hip to the stuff through the avenue of seeing it in the field, not in people's studios. Because again, it's hard for the masses to think about alternating when the price point of so much other equipment that's widely used is more affordable. But once they see like, oh, the playback tech for Doja Cat is using a Lynx Aurora. Oh, the playback guy for so and so is using this. Like, that's when the people start looking and be like, oh, well, that show sounds awesome. Maybe I should use. Like, it's kind of going backwards a little bit, because normally you see the opposite happen. You know, even just UA being in the studio to live happen that way, or anything else. We're seeing it kind of happen backwards, at least on our end. I'm sure it's going in the other direction as well for many others. But because of what we do for a living, we applied it backwards. I mean, I'm looking to get a Lynx put in my studio because I'm tired of using the converters I do have. Through the influence of Jeff and through the application of the live space. So I'm definitely seeing people who care and people that want to use it. They want to be the best at it if they're going to use it live. So they're getting their own personals and putting that in their studios or things like that. And there's a playback company that stores here at the Beehive, and 3 of their rigs have Lynx Auroras in it through Jeff's influence.
Yeah, and I can add to that a little bit. When we kind of popped off, I had known there were maybe 1 or 2 other artists using it out there. I believe Post Malone. And what mattered to us more than even using it live, actually, was the concept of these artists. Vinnie works with so many artists. A lot of them come straight off of record cycles, Halsey being one of them. One of the craziest record cycles that she, or studio productions, let's say, from recording, not a record cycle necessarily, but she just came out of the studio with Trent Reznor. Obviously, tonally, sonically, this is the guy that everyone sets the bar, you know. So we were finding that period of time when we go into what would be called, Vinny might be able to know the name of it better, but it's basically like promo is what we'll call it, where we don't necessarily gear up for a live show or a live tour, but we're bouncing around to radio stations, bouncing around to all the shows, Ellen, SNL, you name it, Good Morning America. And they're all union houses. And one thing that really mattered was the artists just came from hearing everything perfectly in the studio. to now not even being able to use their trusted front of house monitor engineers in musical direction. And these guys work very, very hard to make sure all of these particulars are perfect, and only to have the union house fall short. Let's be honest. And Vinnie and myself have probably sent 15 to 20 people to SNL, and I don't remember a single occasion, whether it be working with Dua Lipa or Halsey or any of the other big artists that we've done, where they didn't say, it just doesn't sound right, something doesn't sound right, I'm not happy, what's going on, guys. And so coming up with state-of-the-art conversion and a production rig for their vocals that can take them, whether they're on tour or whether they're in the studio or whether they're at a show like this, can keep everything congruent in their ears. That was what really started all of it. And then we got to use it for the first time live, which was what, Staples, Vinny, I believe, or Crypto Arena.
Yeah, we did Crypto Arena for the Super Bowl post, or pre-show or whatnot, and our front of house for that performance that came on board to help us design the show was equally as adventurous and wanting to push the limits of just technicals, and he was very patient with the troubleshooting and also really involved in some of the cool decisions. We were all there being like, this is the best live vocal I've ever heard in my life. And it was going through all of that equipment into Live Professor, through all the analog bundle that is behind Jeff, that it was his own personal gear that he brought on board in order to see this through. And, in front of 17,000 people or whatever the Staples is, was, like, in my opinion, still the best sounding vocal we've ever had. We had to strip back the idea slightly once we got into cycle and we were touring and throwing things in semis and stuff like that. And still nothing really ever compares to that show.
Yeah, well, it puts us in a comfortable realm, let's say. Like, for instance, there's a playback tech, we'll name drop, named YS out there, works with the Beehive a lot, and he's jumped on this conversion bandwagon, does a lot of really amazing playback rigs, and works for a lot of great artists. And he's using the Lynx Auroras in combination with direct out technology, the Xbox MDs, which would be Dante or Maddie conversion, and the kind of like the AB sense. But one of the benefits is a lot of guys are out there, no matter what gear they're using, they're smashing it all into the tiniest Pelican they can with two wheels, and that is what it is. And they can sometimes, they still don't like to check them. Well, when you're throwing $12,000 plus, when you add in an Xbox and this guy and some other things onto a rig, you really don't check it. But that's when size really matters, because you're looking at a 10-inch deep rack that you can throw in a traditional carry-on, and now you have this insane tool, whether you're recording vocals as a musical director, or one-offs, or labels for your tracks, or whatever. The top quality is there. It's so functional, it's so portable, there's so many possibilities with it, and that's when you really go, wow, it's worth the money. Interestingly, I was doing Warped Tour, I think in 2008-9 with a band, and we could never find second guitar players ever. Nobody was good enough. And so I would record all of my audio into Pro Tools and just a dry guitar, and then pump it out to real amplifiers. And I would use MIDI from Pro Tools to change all the patches and switch all the amplifiers. And at the same time, we'd be running timecode for lighting, or even Grand MA, MIDI software, to be able to operate moving yokes and stuff on tour. So that was my first version of playback. I've been doing it for a long time, but professionally, it all started really with a couple acts and Vinnie. He's really exploded my career because he has his hands on everything that matters out there. So for me, it was just trying not to get fired gig after gig after gig, and learning as much as we can while always staying at the forefront of technology. That's the one thing, again, which is how we found Lynx, is we never were afraid. We kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it.
I was always playing music my whole life. I had this luxury of having parents that were like, oh, you want to play saxophone? Here's a saxophone. Oh, you want to play drums? Here's a drum kit, not a drum pad. I was one of the luckiest I would say if there was like a competition, I would be in the top 5 luckiest kids where my dad was a musician, not anyone of note, but a hobbyist. And he worked in the music industry as a wiring kind of studio builder and assembly guy. So I was privy to those types of environments. I got baby photos inside of recording studios, like that very iconic artists used to record in. So I grew up in this industry. I was always playing music and in bands, and I was always the band leader. That I didn't call myself that then, but I look back and I go, oh yeah, I was the MD and the tour manager and the manager and the tech and everything for my high school bands. And then I kind of went off and did my own music for a bit, as one does after being in a band. And that kind of stumbled me into also being the band leader, because I was hiring musicians and I was teaching them my songs as I played all the instruments and I was doing that whole thing. And then someone said, hey, I want to pay you to do that for me. And I was like, what? Wait, you're going to pay me what to do what? Like it didn't make any sense to me. It was probably over 10, 11 years ago. And from that point is when I started doing it for a living. And I realized very, very quickly that at the low level, if you're a musical director, you're also everything, just like I was in my high school band. And technology is the centerpiece of all of these shows. So I spent all of my time trying to understand the technology that I spent none of my childhood knowing anything about. So I went to YouTube University, because we're lucky in our generation, we're lucky to have it, and learned everything there was to know about Ableton and Pro Tools and Logic and Mainstage, and then interfaces and switchers and and I really didn't get into the more high quality conversion stuff and the more what's the word for it, I guess just audiophile things that a lot of others don't think about, probably until I felt like I learned everything else I needed to know. It was like I hit a ceiling and I was like, okay, cool, now it's time to look for the next ceiling and the next ceiling. And because there never really is a ceiling. So that's what I spent most of my life doing. I lived in New York when I got into musical directing, and I didn't like that there was no other options other than SAR for rehearsal studios. But the idea of making a rehearsal studio was really expensive, so I just built one in the warehouse I lived in with a bunch of people, and did that. And then I was like, well, this is cool, but there's probably a lot more space in Los Angeles. So I moved back and I started the Beehive, and that was like 2016. Honestly, the thing I tell everyone is just do it. It's just like, this sounds silly, and I feel like people would think that this is untrue, but I straight up was not honest about what I knew how to do when I got my first job. I said that I could do it, and I figured it out later. And the music industry is a risky place to do that in, because if you mess up, it could ruin your reputation, which is a hell of a motivator to figuring out how to do something. When you care that much about your reputation and what people think of you, or you want to make people happy, or a person like myself who cares about words of affirmation and pleasing others, it's like, I want to make sure the client is happy, and I will do anything and lose any amount of sleep in order to do it. Jeff's been there. I've been there. I would say almost anyone I trust at the Beehive has been there. So that would be, in short, my advice is, if you want to get into this and you feel like you have the background and or skills as a foundation to get going, just do it first and figure it out later, because that's the best learner. If you have absolutely no background whatsoever, but you're young and you're interested, then I suggest reading up and learning and talking to as many people as possible who do know what they're doing, because that was also a huge help for me. I had a lot of very influential mentors and people that were probably like the me to them when I was younger, that pointed me in the right direction.